If your total net worth sits at $100,000, you already rank among the top 20% of every adult living on this planet. Not the top 20% of one country, every adult on Earth. And if that figure reaches $1 million, you're sitting in the top 1.1% of all 8 billion people currently alive. The indicators I'm about to walk you through aren't here to inspire you. They're rooted in math. And a few of them are going to completely shift how you see your own financial position. According to the National Endowment for Financial Education, 90% of Americans entered 2026 experiencing some form of financial stress. 88%. And at the exact same time, the median American net worth just reached an all-time high. 69% of Americans told one major financial survey that they feel economically insecure. And simultaneously, American homeowners collectively hold $34 trillion in home equity, a figure that has risen 88% since 2019. A separate study found that nearly 7 in 10 Americans report that financial uncertainty has directly contributed to feelings of anxiety and depression. And yet, if you earn $50,000 annually in the United States, global income data places you squarely in the top 1% of all earners worldwide. Something in that picture doesn't add up. The distance between what people feel and what the actual data reveals is probably the most costly miscalculation most people will ever make. Because someone who believes they're starting from nothing makes fundamentally different choices than someone who recognizes they're already well down the field. And that difference in behavior, compounded across 30 years, produces results that would genuinely change how you see everything. Here's what this video is going to do. I'm going to walk you through 5 specific data-supported indicators that you are already in a stronger financial position than you realize. Not in a vague, feel-good kind of way. In a Federal Reserve data, global context, hard numbers kind of way. And I'm going to explain the psychological mechanism that causes even financially aware, intelligent people to miss this entirely. Because this isn't about making you comfortable. It's about making you make smarter decisions. Feeling financially poor when you're not isn't just an emotional burden. It is an active financial liability. Every business generates 2 core financial documents. There's the income statement, money coming in, money going out, what arrived this month, what left. And there's the balance sheet, what you own, what you owe, and what remains when you subtract one from the other. Most people manage their entire financial lives by staring exclusively at the income statement. The paycheck arrives, the mortgage goes out, the car payment goes out, the grocery bill that somehow keeps climbing goes out. Whatever is left, which in today's economic environment is probably not much, becomes the number they use to judge their financial health. If that number feels tight, they conclude they're struggling. If it goes negative some months, they conclude they're failing. They never look away from that one document. But here's the fundamental structural problem. A business that burns through cash every single month can still carry tens of millions of dollars of value on its balance sheet. Startups operate this way deliberately, sometimes for years. Their income statement would alarm you. Their balance sheet is precisely why investors keep backing them. The income statement and the balance sheet tell entirely different stories about the same company's financial reality. Most people have never actually sat down and read their own balance sheet. And I mean that in the most literal sense. They've never taken a piece of paper, listed every asset, listed every liability, subtracted one from the other, and then compared that number against real population data. This entire video is about the balance sheet you've never looked at. I'll keep returning to that idea because every sign we discuss represents another line item you forgot to include. In a few minutes, I'll show you the single most disorienting wealth comparison in this whole video. The one that reframes the entire picture. But first, let me walk you through an asset hiding in plain sight on your balance sheet that most people actively undervalue, even those who know it exists. The average American homeowner right now is sitting on $295,000 in home equity. That figure comes from data published in early 2026. $295,000. Do you know how long it takes the typical American worker to accumulate $295,000 in savings? A very long time. For most people, we're talking a decade or more of disciplined saving after taxes. And yet, there is a significant portion of American homeowners who, if you ask them their net worth, would respond with their checking account balance. Who would describe themselves as broke because they're $43 ahead after their bills cleared on Thursday? They're carrying an asset the size of a yacht down payment inside the walls of their property, and they've never once put it on a balance sheet. Think about what that single categorization error actually costs in practice. Someone holds a $300,000 asset, larger than the median American retirement account, and is genuinely convinced they're losing. Here's what the actual data shows. According to the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances, the median net worth of homeowners is $396,200. The median net worth of renters is $10,400. That is a 38-to-1 difference. Homeowners don't earn dramatically more money on average. They build wealth through a forced savings mechanism embedded in every mortgage payment, accelerated by a market that has appreciated at an average rate of 4.3% annually from 1994 through 2023, according to CoreLogic and FHFA data. You didn't need to be clever. You didn't need to be a perfect budgeter. You needed to own the asset. The asset did the heavy lifting. Here's a story that illustrates this better than any statistic. There's a man, let's call him Marcus, who spent 15 years telling everyone around him that he simply wasn't a money person. He'd say it over dinner. He'd say it when the check arrived. He carried a deeply negative internal story about his relationship with finances. In 2012, when the housing market was still viewed as radioactive following the financial crisis, he purchased a home in Phoenix for $140,000. It wasn't a calculated investment strategy. He simply needed a place to live, and paying rent felt like watching money evaporate. He bought the house, moved in, stopped thinking of it as a financial asset, and spent the next 15 years making his mortgage payment on autopilot. In 2024, a neighbor sold a home 2 doors down for $410,000. Marcus had roughly $70,000 left on his mortgage. His balance sheet, in which he had never once reviewed, carried $340,000 in equity. By any reasonable measure, he had been a wealthy man for years. He just had never done the arithmetic. His income statement said stressed. His balance sheet told a completely different story. Now, here's the part that deserves honest attention, because this is where it gets genuinely interesting. There's an uncomfortable flip side to this. Home equity for the median American homeowner represents somewhere between 59 and 73% of their total net worth, according to Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finances data. In other words, the house is essentially the entire show, which means the balance sheet looks solid but is largely illiquid. You cannot spend home equity. You cannot move it into an investment account on a Tuesday afternoon. It sits locked inside a structure that requires ongoing maintenance, insurance, and property taxes. The home gets you to a meaningful starting position, but converting that position into actual financial flexibility requires an entirely separate conversation. And that is the conversation most people are never having, because they don't even realize they're in a position to have it. And speaking of assets that keep working while you're not paying attention, stay with me, because what comes next is the section that tends to produce the most unexpected reactions. I've had many conversations about personal finance over the years. This particular topic lands differently than the rest. Here's a question I want you to sit with honestly. When you picture someone who is wealthy, whose face comes to mind? Is it someone you work with? Someone you see on television? A neighbor with a more expensive vehicle? It's almost certainly someone within your immediate social orbit. Someone visible. Someone you're continuously and subconsciously measuring yourself against. That is the entire problem. Here's the actual population you should be measuring yourself against. 8 billion people. According to data drawn from the Credit Suisse Global Wealth Report and confirmed by multiple independent research tools tracking global wealth distribution, roughly half of all adults on this planet hold less than $10,000 in net worth. Half. The global median net worth is approximately $10,000. If your net worth exceeds $10,000, total assets minus liabilities, and that's not a high bar, You are in the upper half of all living human beings on Earth right now. If your net worth reaches $100,000 base, including your vehicle, home equity, retirement account, and savings, AC, you enter the global top 20%. $1 million in net worth places you among the top 1.1% of all adults worldwide, approximately 60 million people out of 8 billion. Now, I already know what objection is forming. That's comparing people across countries with wildly different costs of living. That's not a fair or meaningful comparison. And you're partially correct. Purchasing power is real. Cost of living differences are significant. That framing is imperfect, and I'll acknowledge that openly. But here's what is not imperfect at all: the psychological mechanism. The reason most Americans experience persistent economic inadequacy is not because they are economically inadequate by any reasonable standard. It's because human beings are hardwired to evaluate their circumstances through social comparison. Your neighbors, your professional network online, your coworker who just announced they're purchasing a vacation property, your brother-in-law and his boat. This is called social comparison theory, and it may be one of the most financially expensive cognitive tendencies any of us ever encounter. Because unlike most cognitive biases, this one carries a direct and calculable cost. Here's where the data becomes genuinely uncomfortable. According to a 2024 Modern Wealth survey, Americans say it takes a net worth of $2.5 million to qualify as wealthy. That's the figure people carry in their minds, $2.5 million, and that benchmark has been climbing steadily. $2.2 million a couple of years back, $2.3 million the year after, $2.5 million more recently. The bar keeps shifting upward, but to actually rank among the top 10% of Americans by net worth in 2025, according to Federal Reserve and analytical data, you need just under $1 million, specifically $970,900. To reach the top 5%, you need approximately $1.17 million. So the average American believes wealth begins at $2.5 million. The statistical top 5% actually begins at $1.17 million. That's a gap of $1.3 million between perception and reality. And that gap has an author. The financial media ecosystem requires you to feel inadequate. That's not a conspiracy. That's an incentive structure. You click when you're anxious. You trade when you're afraid. You subscribe to premium services when you feel like you're falling behind. Financial anxiety is not a side effect of financial media. It is the product itself. Having spent more than a decade around accountants and financial professionals, one thing consistently stood out. The people who genuinely understood the numbers were calm. The people who processed their financial lives through headlines were consistently stressed. In many financial situations, anxiety is a product of the reference frame, not the underlying reality. Here's what that anxiety costs in concrete terms. A person who believes they're significantly behind their peers typically falls into one of two behavioral patterns. Either they save nothing because the effort feels pointless, or they take on excessive risk in an attempt to close a gap that doesn't actually exist. Neither of those responses is rational. Both produce outcomes measurably worse than the straightforward, low-cost index fund approach that decades of data has consistently supported. You think the problem is your income level. The actual problem is the comparison group you're using to evaluate your income. Here's something that never appears in the retirement calculator you've been staring at. Understanding these numbers, knowing where you actually rank globally, recognizing that your home equity is a real asset, that your compounding retirement account is growing while you sleep. None of that matters until you have a structured system that turns this awareness into a concrete plan with a specific date and a specific target number. Knowing the scoreboard and knowing how to win the game are two entirely different skills. Access to this kind of data came years before any of it was acted on systematically. The knowledge alone didn't change behavior. A structured framework did. Now, back to the balance sheet. There's a line item most people forget to include, and it may be the most structurally significant one on the entire document. If you have a 401k or an IRA, even a relatively modest one, you are probably not counting it accurately. Here's what that means in practice. Say you're 40 years old with $150,000 sitting in a 401k. You check that balance and think, I'm 40, I only have $150,000. I'm behind. That's the income statement telling you a story. Here's the balance sheet calculation. The S&P 500 has delivered an average annual return of roughly 10% since its inception in 1957. As of December 2025, data from Fidelity confirms the 40-year average annual return sits at 11.5%. At 10% annualized growth, $150,000 left alone over 25 years with zero additional contributions becomes approximately $1.6 million. Run the math yourself. $150,000 multiplied by the 25-year compounding factor at 10%. You're looking at a figure in the range of $1.6 to $1.8 million. No additional contributions required. That is what is already sitting on your balance sheet if you simply leave it in place and stop checking it every time the market dips. Now, here is the devastating counterpart to that calculation. According to Dalbar's quantitative analysis of investor behavior, one of the most widely referenced studies in all of behavioral finance, the average U.S. equity fund investor over the 30-year period from 1993 through 2022 earned 6.81% annually, underperforming the S&P 500 by 2.81 percentage points every year. On a starting value of $100,000 across 30 years, that gap in annual return translates to a difference of $864,000 in final portfolio value. $864,000. Not lost to fees, lost to behavior. Selling during market downturns, chasing last year's top-performing fund, moving into cash when the headlines turned frightening. A separate study found that the average retail investor returned just 2.9% annually over a 20-year period, while the broader market returned 10%. The distance between those two numbers across an entire career is the distance between a comfortable retirement and a genuinely difficult one. You think the problem is that you don't earn enough to invest meaningfully. The actual problem is that the average investor captures less than a third of what the market delivers because they keep interrupting their own compounding. The 401k is one of the most powerful wealth-building instruments ever created for ordinary working people. In 2025, the participation rate among employees who have access to one reached 91%, a historic high, according to data from that sector. That is genuinely encouraging. But showing up to the game and playing it poorly still produces poor outcomes. The participation rate measures presence. It doesn't measure behavior. There's a thread I want to introduce here because it runs through everything that follows. I've been discussing the visible balance sheet, the one containing your home, your brokerage account, your savings. But there's an entire class of asset that never appears on any traditional personal finance balance sheet. Most people have never attempted to assign a number to it. I'm going to call it the invisible balance sheet. By the end of this video, I'll be adding two specific line items to it that most people have never considered. When they calculate those numbers, the full picture shifts substantially. Let me set the stage for signs 4 and 5 with one of the most underappreciated data points in all of personal finance. The average Social Security retirement benefit in 2025 is approximately $1,976 per month, according to the Social Security Administration. For someone claiming at their full retirement age, 67 for most people watching this and living to age 85, that represents 18 years of payments. $1,976 multiplied by 12 months, multiplied by 18 years equals approximately $426,000 in lifetime benefits in today's dollars. Here's the reframe that matters most. If you walked into an insurance company and requested a private annuity, a product that pays $1,976 per month, inflation adjusted, starting at age 67 and continuing for the rest of your life, they would charge you somewhere between $350,000 and $450,000 for that contract, depending on current interest rates. You already hold that contract. You've been funding it through your entire working life. It doesn't appear on your balance sheet because no account statement exists for it. There's no quarterly report, no ticker symbol. It simply accumulates in the background while your attention remains fixed on your checking account. But it is real. It is yours. And if you're married, your spouse may hold one as well. That represents potentially $700,000 to $900,000 in lifetime annuity value for a household, a number that never once appears in how most people think about their financial standing. The second item on the invisible balance sheet is your human capital, your ongoing capacity to generate income. Suppose you're 38 years old, earning $85,000 annually with plans to work until 65. That's 27 more years of earning. 27 multiplied by $85,000 equals $2.3 million in future gross income. Before any raises, before any promotions, before any career changes. Your human capital is a multi-million dollar asset, and most people assign it zero value when they sit down to assess where they stand financially. A financial professional once explained it this way: the reason younger people so severely underestimate their own wealth is that they only count what they've already accumulated, completely ignoring the enormous income-generating asset they carry simply by continuing to show up to work. You are not a $40,000 balance sheet. You are a $40,000 balance sheet plus $2 million in future earning capacity. Those are two entirely different starting points. Here's why all of this matters at the level of actual financial behavior. There is documented evidence, and it's observable up close, that people who genuinely believe they are far behind their peers make systematically different financial decisions than people who believe they are reasonably on track. Not just psychological decisions, real financial ones. They accept higher levels of risk trying to close an imaginary gap. They delay retirement contributions because the effort feels futile when they think they're already too far behind. They hold cash because investing feels like throwing resources at a problem that's grown too large to solve. Every one of those behaviors carries a direct and measurable cost over a 30-year time horizon. You think the problem is your savings rate. The actual problem is the story you've attached to a number you've never accurately calculated. Let me make this concrete. Meet David. He's 44 years old, lives in a mid-sized city in Texas, and bought his home in 2015 for $220,000. Based on comparable sales in his neighborhood, the current market value is approximately $380,000. His remaining mortgage balance is $112,000. His home equity is $268,000. David has a 401k with $90,000 in it, a rollover IRA from a position he left in 2019 worth $35,000, and roughly $22,000 in a savings account. His car loan has $14,000 remaining. Total assets, approximately $415,000. Total liabilities, $126,000. Net worth, approximately $289,000. David genuinely believes he's behind. Between his income and his wife's, they earn $68,000 a year, and it never quite feels sufficient. He's 44 and keeps encountering articles reminding him that he should have 3 times his salary saved by now. And when he looks at $90,000 in his 401k and does that arithmetic, the numbers don't align with 3 times $68,000. But here's what the data says about David. The median net worth for Americans aged 45 to 54, according to the Federal Reserve's most recent survey of consumer finances, is $247,000. David sits above the median for his age group. He is in stronger financial shape than more than half of all Americans within 5 years of his age. Globally, $289,000 in net worth places him comfortably within the top 3 to 5% of all adults on Earth.